earned both bachelor and master's degrees in ocean engineering. He was and still is very active in the Tau Beta Pi Engineering Honor Society, growing his school's chapter as president, and now paying it forward as a volunteer, teaching management skills to engineering students and helping to bring STEM programs to kindergarten through grade 12 students. Using his business operations and product management skills, he has brought products and services to market both within and outside the field of engineering. In fact, I think I read you have a patent. Now, he's been able to combine those management skills with his advocacy for patients' rights in the medical cannabis space in his current role as CEO of CannaPlan, which offers medical cannabis employee benefit programs to employers. But why would an employer consider offering a medical cannabis benefit program to their employees if, as the reefer madness mentality would have us believe, marijuana use results in employees who are unmotivated, who are more prone to injury, and who will progress to the use of opiates? Well, to address this misconception, our speaker utilized his engineering left brain skills to analyze data from the Florida Division of Workers' Compensation, sharing with us how medical cannabis impacts workers in Florida is Stu Baskin.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming out, and thanks to Gene and Dana for setting it up again this year. It's always a pleasure to come and see some familiar faces, and it's nice to give a presentation in front of familiar faces. Maybe we can start a new trend. My socks are a shark eating a surfer, representing life. And so, not mentioned in the bio, my dad actually is a retired gastroenterologist and hepatologist, and so at dinners growing up I heard a lot of stories, and so I became an engineer. So with the CMEs, I got some good recommendations from that group and laid out my report to give you guys some nice information, completely different from looking at patient studies, because I'm not a doctor, but I love looking at numbers and seeing trends and seeing what I can do with numbers to represent them for folks. I want to start off with a disclaimer, of course. This is not advice for anything, anytime, with anyone, anywhere, doing anything. And also, correlation doesn't mean causation. You guys know about that. And then there's my little personal theorem. I'm not going to read it all off. Basically, you all understand that cannabis is a safer alternative to pharmaceuticals. That's what I've seen in my life. If we have workers given access to cannabis as an alternative to opiates and benzos and SSRIs, if it works better for them and it's safer, then they should definitely be taking that as an alternative. And so some of the numbers we'll look at kind of prove that for us. Last year I presented here, and I talked about this report that I found from the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they looked at states that had a legal adult use cannabis program or adult use legalization put in place. After that was put in place, workers' comp costs started coming down. They saw less accidents in the workplace, cost reduction of 20% on average in these states, which is huge when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars getting spent each year. And then the opiate reduction, of course. And the theory behind this was that as you're reducing the opiate use in workers, you're helping workplaces become safer because there are less accidents. And if you look at now what we're going to look at today, cannabis seems to be offsetting that opiate use. And so this was just for older workers. Some of the other studies also showed company valuations increasing, patent production increasing, older workers coming back to the workforce, all these benefits when cannabis is legalized. So I wanted to start off pre-cannabis in Florida. Well, I guess I should back up a step. After reading that report, I decided, let me look at the Florida data and see what I can find in that. And luckily, Florida has very sufficient information on all the expenditures in their program. You can go into their annual reports and pull out all kinds of numbers. Definitely not the case for every state. These are the overall costs for the 4 years here. You can just see them increasing steadily each year. And that's what we would expect from a workers' comp program. There's more workers, more accidents, costs of everything's constantly going up, so you would expect incremental increases each year. So here's what happened over the past 9 years of data given. And so we see that increase in the costs that we left off on from the previous slide, and then the medical cannabis program starts in Florida. And we see the trend in costs starting to come down a little bit. This, I guess it's not a little bit because it's like $100 million, which is a pretty big amount. And so as the program continued to increase the amount of patients, we see the continued decrease in the costs, and these are actually the settlement costs. I pulled those because they related directly to the MBER report, and they were looking at settlement costs. Here, unfortunately, we see the settlement costs come back up in 2023. But that was also when the least amount of patients joined the medical cannabis program since its inception. So really saw a slowdown in the program, and those workers' comp numbers started to come back up. Is that correlated or causation? Probably not.
I run a lot of work comp data. That's also a COVID effect you have in there. Payrolls dropped from 21 to 22 for workforce.
Mm-hmm.
We see this on all our work comp graphs.
Okay.
But there's an unequivocal correlation. I'll say correlation.
Well, we'll get further into it. Yeah, so we've actually seen this in all states that have legalized adult use cannabis where the costs started coming down. And that was pre-COVID for that study. That came out in 2021. Yeah, but other states, the costs just continued to increase. So this was the next part that I looked at, opiate costs and the amount of opiates that are being prescribed through workers' comp compared to the amount of medical cannabis patients. In 2015, the opiate costs were about $30 million a year, which is crazy. And now in 2023, we've come down right around $7-8 million. Is that all due to cannabis? Absolutely not. There are various laws that have gone into place. But what I noticed is this section, where it's the most rapid decrease in the opiates being prescribed, kind of correlating to the most rapid increase in medical cannabis patients. So I said, well, let me graph that out. And that's how that looks. So the decrease in opiate costs seem to be pretty aligned with the medical cannabis patients increasing. Now, is that saying that people started taking cannabis and stopped taking opiates, or they were prevented from taking opiates, so started taking cannabis? Unknown. I do know that there was a law that went into place, I think 2019, saying that could only be 3 days worth of opiates prescribed. I would think that would cause a rapid decrease, like a huge jump. Here in 2019, you would think it would drop straight off with that going into effect. Instead, it seems like it was more gradual. I don't know how much that was actually a factor. Maybe people can still prescribe opiates through workers' comp as they wish and get around that 3-day limit somehow.
That's only for acute pain.
Okay.
Once they take chronic pain, there's no restriction, so you can do it unlimited.
Okay.
So if you're hurting from your back, you can stay on opioids forever.
Sounds terrible. All right, so these are the trends that I saw, and then these are some other states. After I looked at everything, I said, you know what, I'm going to argue with myself for a little bit. What do the other states look like? Of the 4 states that have no legal cannabis whatsoever, only 2 of them actually had workers' comp data. Wyoming, no data at all. South Carolina, very insufficient, couple years worth of non-telling numbers. But in Idaho and Kansas, these are the trends we saw. And Idaho seems like exactly what you would expect from workers' comp costs. Each year, just stepping up, coming up. And then, Kansas seems like there was more of that effect seen from the pandemic, where it drops off and then spikes back up the next year. So we're seeing different trends in each different state. But overall, that trend in Kansas is coming up over time. If I were to put a running average on that, you'd see an increase, which again, as expected. So as I'm arguing with myself, I look at the other reasons. Opiate 3-day prescription, already mentioned that. Did that drive the increase in cannabis patients or vice versa? It's unknown. Pandemic, I think Brad, right? Is their name Brad? Yeah. Brad mentioned. The cost of opiates decreasing. I thought, okay, maybe the opiates were dropped down in cost, and that was reasoning. Nope, they went up by about 3 times in 6 years. And I typed it into Google AI. I said, why are the workman's comp costs coming down? And this is what it gave me. Less claims and severity. Okay, that might be because of the cannabis, like we've seen in other states. Improved risk management always will be happening. Brad?
If you go back a slide, I'll show you something real quick. Your 23 numbers in the insurance world as an insurance underwriter for work comp, you can't use them because they're considered what's called undeveloped. The cost of a work comp claim cannot fully mature and known for 5 years due to how long were they off, did we go to court. So they're very immature when we use them. When that 23 moves a year, you put 24 there, it'll go up by about 20-30% naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll keep going too. So.
I did see that with Florida, about a 10% difference in year, the following, but I did want to put, the most recent given data. But even if you took those 2023 numbers out, you still see that increasing trend.
That 23 next year matching 22.
Okay.
The same claims, yeah.
Okay.
Because you have 2 years to file a claim in some jurisdictions too. You think you're hurt, that drives that up too.
Makes sense. And so I just listed out, how does cannabis seem to be helping? I'm not really big on reading slides, and you can read faster than I can speak anyway, so I'll let you just go ahead on that. Thoughts or questions on that, doctors? Can you prove me wrong? And that's all that I have for you.
All right. Well, turns out we're actually on schedule. We'd scheduled a 30-minute question, answer, comment period. So for either of our speakers, if anyone has a question or other comment, if you could raise your hand, we're going to bring the microphone around to you since this is being recorded so everyone can hear. So there we go.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Rosado.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a practicing physician here in Florida. The question is with the ketamine, do you use it, when you use it for this patient, you cannot use it and then stop the treatment, or did the patient continue to use the ketamine, or what happened with that? And also, when people use it, sometimes they use it recreational. So what is your experience with that, addiction and things like that?
Okay, excellent question. And so for those of you, well, everybody heard the questions, right? As far as what happens after the treatment. So the studies that have been done have shown that, and the protocol that I've been using for the past 5 years has been the Yale protocol, which as I mentioned is twice a week for 3 weeks. And I also mentioned that esketamine's protocol is twice a week for 4 weeks, once a week for 4 weeks, and they do a booster a month later. Okay, we offer 3 tiers in our office. You either do once a week for 3 weeks, or twice a week for 3 weeks, or twice a week for 3 weeks, then once a week for 3 weeks, and then a booster a month later. I have patients that get their boosters done every 3 to 6 months because they already know how they feel when they're under the effect and the benefit of the ketamine. So once they start noticing their moods starting to shift or them starting to twist or turn or whatever, they call, schedule an appointment, we do a consult, and then we get them scheduled to come back and get a booster shot. So we do boosters throughout. I've got two TBI patients. One is a veteran who, well, many are veterans, but this one in particular, he was driving his Humvee and hit, I always screw up the name, those implanted bombs. Say it again? Thank you. So it went off. Everybody in his crew died. He was the only one that lived. However, he was in a coma for 6 months. So when he came to and found out what had happened to his crew, now he had survivor's remorse in conjunction with a massive TBI, in conjunction with PTSD, in conjunction with PTSI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He forgot how to ride a bicycle. He forgot how to drive. He had to start everything from scratch. And I've got videos that his wife has sent me, him riding a bicycle, him balancing his checkbook, him driving his vehicle. But he gets a booster at least once a month. But the trauma and damage that is in his brain, I mean, his MRIs are no joke. And so he needs to have it done. Now, as far as abuse and recreational, it's the same response that I give everybody that asks me what the difference between recreational cannabis and medical cannabis. The only difference is that in medical cannabis, the recommendation comes from a medical doctor or a doctor of osteopathy. That's it. It's working on the same receptors. So when you're using ketamine, it's still medical because it's stimulating it's blocking the NMDA, it's stimulating the glutamate, it's stimulating the BDNF, it's stimulating the formation of new cells, and it's creating new synapses. Now, is there abuse? Absolutely. As humans, we have a tendency to want to abuse things because if a little is good, a lot's got to be better. And if I like the way I feel when I'm doing this, I'm going to want to continue to do it. That's where there's a problem. That's why this is done in our office or our offices, and we don't recommend it to be done outside of the home. Outside of the office. Now, for the trochees, there are some people that feel better staying in their home simply because it's a comfortable environment. They have really bad PTSD. They don't feel comfortable leaving their home because of agoraphobia or social anxiety disorder, et cetera, et cetera. And so in those scenarios, we will make certain concessions and allow them to do the trochees in their home. But for the most part, it's in office under direct supervision. And they bring their own trip sitter as well, not to speak to them, but just to be there to provide an extra layer of safety and security for the individual.
So ketamine's really very interesting, and I want to find out more about it as well. So 2 questions. First, are there symptoms of physical dependence from ketamine? And second, is it used to treat alcoholism?
First question was physical dependence. No, it is not like heroin or alcohol where you need more and more and more to attain the same response, because it doesn't create a physiological dependence, more of a psychological dependence like cannabis. Okay. As far as for alcoholism, and you noticed on there were areas to be careful of: teens, adolescents, etc. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov and type in ketamine, you'll see that there are clinical trials being done right now on children below the age of 12, older than the age of 12, for children that have PTSD, that have anxiety, that have depression, and they're studying that. They're also studying the senior population, and there are studies being done on alcohol use disorder, opiate use disorder, cocaine use disorder. It does work well. There's really only 2 contraindications for using ketamine, one being uncontrolled hypertension, because it does have a tendency to increase your blood pressure. So vital signs are checked before, during, and after their session to make sure that they don't have an elevation in their blood pressures. Thus far, we've noticed that everyone's blood pressure drops. They come in, the blood pressure is high because they're anxious and uncertain about what's going to happen, and nobody really wants to relinquish control and be dissociated, so they freaking out, and so the blood pressure is a little high. So what do we tell them? Hit your vape pen in your vehicle before you come in here. Am I condoning to breaking the law? Yeah, I am. I am telling them to use it in public. But why? I would rather they do that than take a freaking benzodiazepine and then come in and now have a drug-drug interaction with the ketamine and the benzodiazepine. So that being said, I take my risks. I pick my fights. So, but yeah, there are studies showing the benefits of using ketamine for different types of use disorder, including alcohol. The other contraindication is active alcoholism. So if they are drinking alcohol, they have to at least not be drinking when we give them the medication because of the metabolization that occurs in the liver.
Question for Stu. I think you might have unlocked a massive opportunity for cannabis-focused doctors to make money helping injured workers get back to work using cannabis. From the insurance industry, I see it, I've done it anecdotally here, savings to employers upwards of 30 to 50% off their work comp premium. It could be higher too. It could be higher, the work comp. So the opportunity for doctors to work with the insurance industry to get workers back to work using cannabis therapies. It's a massive opportunity, for physicians. From the insurance industry, we need people with that kind of skill because getting someone back to work is up to a doctor, usually. They're released to work, right? So my question to you really is, the types of employers that are using employee benefits programs that are cannabis focused, are they just right now the dispensaries and so on, or do you have any kind of manufacturers or higher risk construction companies? But there's federal laws that certain transportation workers and so on can't break, but there's a connection here that we could explore with the employee benefits focused on cannabis, as I understand it.
Yeah, so as far as our members, they're mostly laborers. We haven't really been working with the dispensaries too much, but
Okay.
it's a market.
That's where we're at,
It's
yeah.
retail. Retail's difficult just based on their typical employee benefit programs or lack thereof. But from the workers' comp side, one change that'll have to be made is that the employee that's been injured will have to visit the physician monthly or even more regularly to get continued checkups to say you're getting better, or you still need to be on workers' comp, or you need to get back to work. And so that's definitely something that we can accommodate with our physician group. I've already talked to them about setting up more frequent appointments just to meet those requirements of the workers' comp programs and make sure that everybody's getting treated properly. And
Right, we could have insurance, like we run large pools that are self-insured. I don't deal with an insurance company. The company is the insurance company.
and the self-insures.
Yeah, we pick the doctor's panel.
Yeah, companies that self-insure benefit by far more than,
Yeah, so
than
I want at
ones
least
that are working with.
one cannabis-trained doctor on the panel, so that if I have a worker who's using that instead of opioids, I can get him back to that forklift driving quicker.
And we see thousands of dollars in reductions of costs
Right,
compared to pharmaceuticals. If somebody's able to move to cannabis instead of an opiate or an SSRI, it's like $10,000 savings minimum a year. It's crazy.
Yeah, I work with all the hospitals in Ohio, and we just voted, the work comp board, we are not testing nurses in Ohio for cannabis anymore. We're encouraging the use. We are a legal state. You can get your card and work with a doctor, and the employers are no longer pre-employment testing. Now we could take this other step of saying get them back to work after an assault or an injury from the back, but we need the doctors to get them back to work because we have nobody in the insurance industry who understands the medicine clinically to say it's safe to return to work. Right.
Yep.
Same problem.
Yeah.
Do you work for Rose? I think Rosen Hotel has a program with their employees
They do.
where they give them money to
Yeah.
go to dispensaries and they.
Yeah, they have a physician group that they work with where their employees can just go see them as needed, cannabis physician, and they give them a stipend. I think it's like $30 a month.
$60.
Oh, 60, nice.
Yeah, and then you use that, and then whatever else they spend, they pay cash themselves.
Yeah, it's a great internal program, and I bet they save a lot of money, because if somebody were to have a prescription for Xanax, the cost difference if they were to switch to cannabis is,
They still do everything else, and
Yeah.
just take that as their medicine.
yep. And if employees are educated about the different cannabinoids, saying, CBG is very effective for inflammation and pain instead of THC. So when you walk into the dispensary, they're trying to give you all this high THC flower, but you say, actually, I want some CBD or CBG. What products do you have with that in it? You can kind of start making a shift in that dispensary industry. And CBN for going to sleep. There's all these different ways that employees can treat themselves responsibly with cannabis without even touching THC.
Mr. Rosen was one of the first.
Yeah, this question is for Mr. Baskin. So I was wondering,
Have you seen an increasing amount of acceptance on the HR side? I know you also attend HR conferences and other events as well. Have you seen any trends toward that in the last couple of years?
Absolutely. So yeah, I go to the HR conference, HR Florida each year. It's coming up in August. The first year I was there, had the stand set up, and people were going by, and they said, we would never offer that. Said, we're never going to give our employees cannabis. I said, okay, it's your decision. And I said, do you have any free samples? So then when I was there last year, the perception had already shifted. People were coming up saying we had to fire somebody because they failed a drug test, and it was just random, and there was no reason we had to let them go. But then we're out a team member, the company has to find somebody new to replace them. He said, yeah, that's the problem that's starting to occur. If you don't update your drug-free workplace policy, then you're going to have to let people go. And now we're seeing lawsuits. So in Hillsborough County, there was the paramedic that was terminated after failing a random drug test with a medical cannabis card, sued Hillsborough County and won for discrimination against a medical cannabis patient. So now there's kind of the onus on public municipalities to say, okay, if you're going to be a medical cannabis patient, we need to write something in to protect you, or else you can be fired after an accident, and then we get sued because of our outdated drug-free workplace policies. So that's something CannaPlan helps with as well.
Real quick, Pennsylvania Supreme Court passed a law that the employer has to pay for the cannabis in a work contract. There's
Nice.
like 3 other states that passed it.
In the claim, just a second.
Claim.
Yeah, like you would any
The
medicine.
employer, yeah, pay for the medicine.
That's definitely the direction we're going. Yeah.
They're legitimizing it as a medicine.
Yeah, it's a third party pay for the first time.
Barry's been so patient back there.
I have a,
I probably won't even bite. As we go forward, everybody, I mean, the protection in the workplace is one of the things that we're gonna have to hang our hat on in order to retain our patients. I tell everybody, and you guys have heard this read before, you'll probably hear it 5 times, you know, over the weekend. I mean, it's taxes on the other side. We need to get protection in the workplace for our patients. If we can get home grow for 6 plants or so for medical cannabis patients, if we can get the ability for those patients to take it state by state. I call it, it's taxes, it's quality of product. That's the other thing. You watch what goes on, okay? There's going to be a distinct difference between what's available on the recreational legal adult use side and what's available on the medical side. That's the only way we're going to survive. I sent to the Justice League group an article out of Ohio that has shown what's going on up there. And I've said this for years. They're not going to scrutinize the patients that we're putting into the program until it starts to cost them money. And when there's taxes involved over on this side, and our patients are going to want to stay in the program or get into the program to avoid that 25% tax over on the rec side, you watch. That's when they're going to start scrutinizing the Section Ks and the similar and likewise and others. You watch. It has nothing to do with safety or saving money in the work comp system. Still, have they invited you up yet to testify? Okay?
I offered to present this data at the Workers' Comp Conference in August, and they said, no, thank you.
Listen, we had to listen to, and I will refuse to call her Dr. Jessica Spencer. Okay, we had to listen to Jessica Spencer and the PhD consortium, you know, doctor, I guess, you know, be the ones that presented up in front of the legislature again this year, where there's you and Joe and myself and others that could bring unbelievable perspective to where we're at 8 years into this program. But believe me when I tell you, everybody, it's that protection in the workplace that is one of the tangible things that we're going to have to rely on to insist that we get. And I know sometimes people aren't here tomorrow. The most important senator for us as we go forward is a gal by the name of Senator Tracy Davis, okay? And if you followed Florida this year, there was very little talk about us. There are a lot of talk on the hemp space, and we'll talk about that over this weekend, believe me, because it's a disaster. But what Senator Davis has said, and it's important, everybody deserves their lane. Everybody's got to stay in their lane. The CBDers, the hempsters, stay in your lane. Legal adult use, you're going to have your lane. We need to insist that we get our lane. And our lane is going to have to consist of certain things like employee protections. Absolutely.
And with the legal precedent set, if more municipalities are starting to get sued for terminating employees, then money becomes an issue, and when the money starts getting lost, that's when changes occur.
So I don't have a question, but I'm going to follow up with Barry with a comment. We have worked legislatively for several years, encouraging the legislature to introduce workplace protections bills, and we've had workplace protections bills introduced for several years now. So what I would like to encourage everybody to do is to contact your senator, contact your House representative. This is the perfect time to do it while they are in their districts and not while they're in Tallahassee. Call them up. I'm a constituent. I would like to make an appointment with my senator. I would like to make an appointment with my House member. And your voice is your vote. So if you tell them, you know, this is something that's important to me. I know that workplace protections bills have been introduced for a couple of years in a row, and they've not even gotten a hearing in committee, and this is something that I, as your constituent, want to see happen, because that's the only way that laws will change.
I want to follow up on that while we're going to the next person. If there's anyone here in the room or listening who's not from Florida, they might not realize that Florida does not have employment protections at this point in time, which is why the passionate plea, which is so needed. The Florida Medical Cannabis Physicians Group also has workplace protections as one of our legislative priorities. I think anyone in the cannabis space realizes how important it is. I mean, it's I was taught by a lobbyist, probably 30 years ago on an emergency medicine issue. There's something legislators understand, and that's parity. You know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You know, that if someone is taking an opiate or a benzo under the supervision of a physician and it shows up on their drug test, but that's okay because they're taking it under the supervision of a physician. But if cannabis shows up, even though it's under the supervision of a physician, medical, and they're not going to be hired or fired, that's not parity. That's just wrong. There's probably a misconception among employers and also legislators that if medical cannabis is allowed in the workplace, then employers are going to be forced to establish a place and a time for their employees to smoke, and the odor is going to be detectable, in the workplace, and other things that would have to be extended to the worker that aren't who uses medical cannabis that aren't extended to anyone else. That's just a misconception. So we really need to address that. So whenever we talk about workplace protections, it's not employee protection, it's employer and employee protection, so that it's very clear that the employer is being protected, as well, as well as the employee. So try to remember that it's employer and employee protections. And again, just not asking for any special treatment, just treat people using cannabis as medicine as you treat any other employee who's taking a controlled medicine as medication. And you're absolutely right. This is the time to contact local legislators. In your district, when they're home. It's very difficult when they're in Tallahassee. And also, representatives only have a certain number of bills they're allowed to introduce each session. So it's important to talk with them early to see if we can get any interest to be one of their 6 bills or however many bills they're allowed. The Senate's allowed more. But it's just important to establish a relationship with local legislators, offer to be their resource, and but we really do need to get the employment protections for both employers and employees fixed here in Florida. One of our patients worked for Publix for decades. He was a trainer, outstanding employee, never an issue, but a fellow employee got mad at him, knew that he used medical cannabis, mentioned it to his supervisor, who felt a need to do a test, even though it wasn't based on performance. Sure enough, it showed up for the THC, and he was fired. That's just wrong. We really do need, it's very important to do something about that. All right, next, any other question? Next question?
Well, actually, I have an anecdote that it's going to explain one of the problems. I was asked to be an expert witness in one of my patients who got a DWI and was told he is not allowed to use medical cannabis while on probation. He appealed that. The judge decided that since I was not prescribing marijuana because it wasn't a drug, I was only recommending it, that even though the law says you're allowed to be on drugs during probation, like benzos or other things, but she said because it wasn't a real drug, she didn't have to approve it. So medical marijuana isn't a real drug. It doesn't have the benefits. People can say, well, you're just recommending something. You're not prescribing it. You're not supervising it. We're not going to pay for it because it's not an approved medical drug.
And that's what we see with workers' comp too. So when companies get the claims, if it's not an FDA-approved drug, and they're on the side of companies that say we're not going to approve anything we don't have to, they'll just say that it's not approved. But forward-thinking companies will say, okay, we can go with this.
And I'm going to ask Joe a question while anyone else is thinking of one. And again, just like cannabis, ketamine, therapy, for depression and PTSD is still in its early phases. So there's a lot to learn, a lot of research yet to do. But at this point, is there any evidence that when ketamine is used with cannabis, that there's a synergistic effect, or we just don't have the data on that yet?
To date, I don't know of any studies that do the comparison of comparing the two. However, in a few years, I'll have the data because the majority of my patients, if not all of them, are medical cannabis, and we add the ketamine, to their regimen because, just today I saw a patient that is on 3 different mood stabilizers, 1 antidepressant, 1 anti-anxiety medication, and has a diagnosis of PTSD, has the diagnosis of treatment-resistant depression because she's been on not just the ones that I saw today on her chart, but she's had others throughout her life. So she definitely meets the criteria for the PTSD as well as the other. And so I brought it up to her attention. I said, look, is this something you would want to consider? And she said, well, I'm a vet tech. And so the only recollection I have of ketamine, yes, who's snickered? Yeah, the only recollection I have of ketamine is that it is a horse tranquilizer, which is what I get from those that are born from 1946 to 1964, because that's what they know about ketamine. And then those, that are in the millennials that used it in the 90s as a party drug. And so I'm getting more pushback with the ketamine than I do with the cannabis to a certain extent. But that being said, when she was saying, my recollection of ketamine is we would give it to cats and they would come out of the anesthesia and they'd be, scratching and going crazy. I'm like, well, you're not gonna be scratching or going crazy. I can guarantee you that. And so she got a chuckle out of it. And so, we scheduled her for a later time, so that she could have a one-on-one with me specifically about the ketamine and discuss the benefits that she would gain in conjunction and using the cannabis together with the ketamine. Something else is that ketamine is not one of the drugs that are checked on a urine drug screen. I'm a medical review officer, and that's not one of the ones that are checked because, again, half-life is 3 hours. So they get done with their session. By the time they get to their home and they use the restroom, it's pretty much out of their system. So, which is a viable option and alternative for your first responders, for individuals that cannot be on medical cannabis because of their work. They can certainly use it. And I mean, I am a former first responder. How did I treat it back in the 80s? I drank myself silly.
Yeah. Any other questions, anyone? Well, thank all of you for coming here for this first session. They call it a pre-conference workshop, but to me, this is just another session with valuable information from great speakers, and we appreciate you showing up for this. And actually, here in just a few minutes, we can go over to the exhibit hall for our opening reception. And after that, again, if anyone is interested in attending the Florida Medical Cannabis Physicians Group annual in-person meeting at this conference, it'll be in the back of the lecture hall, or excuse me, in the back of the exhibit hall. So again, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for your good questions and comments.